afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In the series on sociology of religion, today we are going to talk about one of the classical theories of religion, and that is Malinowski. Malinowski's theory of religion becomes very significant because there was a kind of an evolutionary understanding of religion in which a number of anthropologists tried to put across the argument that as society is evolving from simple society to a complex society, or from a rural agrarian to a modern society, there is an evolution in terms of ideas and beliefs. That is, society is moving from magic, which is more in terms of supernatural, to religion, to scientific thinking. And this is kind of being talked about when we look into how Malinowski is going to give us a theory of magic, religion and science as coexisting, and therefore he will kind of begin his study by asking certain basic questions, and some of the basic questions that is kind of helps us to understand whether there has been an evolution or there is a coexistence. So when we look into Malinowski, he was kind of anthropologist, one of the classical anthropologists, and he studied the Trobriand Islanders. The Trobriand Islander is a small island in South Pacific, which is New Guinea, and his study was based from 1914 to 1918. He is regarded as one of the initial anthropologists to have done an participant observation ethnographic study, and from his study he arrives at the theory of magic, religion and science. And to begin with, in terms of method, because method becomes very significant, Malinowski was a functionalist. Why do we kind of call Malinowski as a functionalist? Because he will be showing us the functions that religion performs in different rituals. So he's kind of relating the religion with the social structure, and he will be looking into the functions of religion during the life crisis like birth, death, funeral rites and so on. So for him, religion kind of understood as shared values and behavioral norms, which created solidarity between society. Very similar to Malinowski's functionalism, we also have Durkheim. Durkheim has also given us a functionalist theory of religion, and he believed that religion played an important role in building connections between people by creating shared differences of the sacred and the profane. In another lecture, which will be on Emile Durkheim, we will be talking exclusively on Durkheim's theory. But just to kind of get a sense of it, he was trying to say that the entire universe can be divided into the sacred and the profane. Sacred are things which are more religious, which are kind of considered of high importance, and profane is mundane, everything life. And what is religion is something that we attach to the sacred. And when all a set of people in one particular community have a common belief around a sacred thing, it increases the solidarity. People become conscious about their belief system. So he gives reference to the totem, which is kind of a symbol which is on the body of every society. Durkheim studied the people who had this totemism as one of the earliest belief system, and believed that every tribe could kind of connect through this symbol. So the consciousness comes in from the totem which is on their body, and it kind of binds the society. But though they are both functionalists, we'll see that there are certain similarities and differences. So first we look into the similarity between Malinowski's and Durkheim's theory of religion. So if for both of them, religion has a functionalist perspective, that is, religion performs certain co-functions in society. And what is common between Malinowski and Durkheim is that both are trying to argue that religion helps us to reinforce the social norm and values which promote social solidarity. However, Malinowski did not see society as reflecting, religion as reflecting society as a whole, and nor did he see religious ritual as evolving the worshipping of society. Now here, if we kind of briefly look into Durkheim theory, for Durkheim, society is God. This is a statement from his work, which is saying that society is sacred, and he's equating it to the level of a god. So just as we kind of pay respect, obey, and we kind of subordinate ourselves, similarly when we look into society, it is going to help us to subside our individual needs and desire and collectively work for the society. But this Durkheim is kind of being very obsessive about the solidarity in the society, and this is why, because the time that he was writing, there was a lot of social disrupt, industrialization, large scale migration, secularization and modernization. All these things were bringing about a lot of change in the social structures of the society. So he was trying to argue that religion can bring back that solidarity. So he is saying from mechanical solidarity to organic solidarity. So solidarity is kind to be retained. When we look into Malinowski, he kind of looks into the specific functions of religion, and this specific function is not kind of abstract at the society level, but more in terms of the emotional stress or psychological disbalance which happens when a life crisis takes place. So, for instance, he will tell us what happens when death takes place, how religion kind of reinforces the solidarity. So, we will be talking about the life crisis, and through that Malinowski is explaining the functions of religion. Now, Malinowski was critical of Durkheim, and he kind of says that you cannot imagine religion to be entirely devoid of inspiration of solitude. So, what Durkheim says is that when we are in a collective, we forget about our individual desire, we forget about, and we kind of get binded by the social norms. But then there is a kind of a debate whether individual kind of becomes significant or collective becomes significant. So Durkheim is giving us a collective view. He is giving more focus on the collective, on the society, and he is kind of negating individual solitude, individual desire, and so on. So that is the difference between Malinowski and Durkheim. Now, when we look into Malinowski's understanding, he also critiqued Durkheim in the sense of, talking about whether immortality arises for an individual and it has nothing to do with social or collective. So, many a time we have seen that one does not follow the normative pattern, does not follow what the collective is doing. So, at that point, an individual follows his or her individual instinct. So, what Malinowski is saying, that it is not always that the collective will dominate. Individuals' belief system, individuals' own choice are sometimes given prominence over the collective. Third critique of Durkheim is that morals in the society are enforced by personal responsibility and conscience rather than by fear of social punishment. And this is kind of, we are following a norm not because we are scared of the collective, or we are kind of following it just because we have to pay the punishment, but many a time it's an individual decision which can kind of overcome the collective consciousness or can overcome the punishment. So, for a very simple example, let's say when on the red light, when it's red, the majority of the people will follow the traffic rules, but one can just go against the collective and break the traffic rule to cross and just go when it's red. Why? Because it is his or her individual choice. Maybe the penalty or the penalty that one has to pay for breaking the traffic light, one is ready to pay. So the collective is not then important. The individual's decision or choice becomes significant. The next criticism of Durkheim is that he is kind of giving too much of significance to the moral force, that the society is so strong that it can unite people. and the individual's choice, decision are kind of less significance. But then if the society's moral norms were so strong, then there would be no differences, and then there would be no violence around ideology, there would be no violence around certain sets of beliefs and ideas. So it is from the community that certain individual could kind of differ or break and kind of give an alternative viewpoint, and that is where clash or conflicts takes place. Malinowski also points out that not all collective enterprises in society can be described as religious activity. So when he's saying that society is is God, he is looking at society as a collective where all members of a particular clan are together. But there could be several collectivity in the sense the number of people getting together, but all cannot be defined as a religious activity. For instance, we can see a huge crowd around an accident which has taken place. Now, no individual is going to attend the victim of the accident because there are certain rules, certain repercussions which will happen. So, it is a collective when number of people are together, and we can kind of identify that they are all from the same community or group, but then it's not a religious activity. So, Malinowski gives us the example of a battle or a sailing regatta or a village brawl. So, these are all kind of to be put together, the negative part of the collective. So, it's not that the collective is always positive. The collective can also have negative function, and it is there when, say, communalism or conflict, violence kind of takes place. Next, he is saying that collective and religious may overlap. For Durkheim, collective and religious are one and the same. So, when he is saying that the religious idea emerges during a collectivity, for Malinowski, collective and religion are separate. They might overlap, but they are not the same always. So, he argues that society includes both religious and non-religious or profane aspect of life. So, cannot be equated with religious or sacred aspect alone. For Durkheim, religion was to do with sacred alone. Everything which was sacred was religious. But then there could be certain distinction between two categories, sacred and profane, and religious and non-religious. Non-religious can also be sacred, and religious can be profane. So, that is kind of the difference between Durkheim and Malinowski. Now, we try to understand Malinowski's approach to study religion. And his approach is described as universal in the particular. Now, what is universal? Universal is, say, a practice which is to be found in all society, whereas particular is specifically to one society per se, specific to, say, the society to Trobriand Islander. Now, his theory is trying to arrive at, he's studying one particular society but doing a generalization. That is, what is found in this particular society falls true for the other society as well. And that is what he means by universal in the particular. Now, his primary scientific interest in the study of culture as a universal phenomena. So, culture is something which is found in every society, and he wanted to kind of arrive at a scientific study of a specific culture and kind of to figure out what are the particularities in terms of cross-cultural comparison. And he kind of, he belongs to the borderline where one half lies in older preoccupation within universally valid principles of human behavior, and the other half lies in newly found concern with empirical research in a particular society. So, this is his kind of approach to study of religion, where he is kind to not consider the universal and the particular as polar parts, but there is a kind of a continuous flow from one to the other. So, it is not possible to study all the culture at the same time. But how will you arrive at a scientific study is to study one specific culture and try to figure out what are the features which could help us to understand culture per se. So, that is what he was attempting to do. So, at the level of particular, so the universal idea was to study culture. At the level of particular, he was studying the religious belief practices among the Trobriand islanders. And he considered the islanders as supreme example of humanity. And he collected a lot of data, a lot of material during his 4 years research, and therefore he kind of arrives at a generalized view of the nature and function of magic and religion. So he's trying to understand both magic and religion. So the link between one's observation of social life and one's understanding of universally valid idea is simple and smooth. So what is he doing is, he is studying a particular society. He is trying to do, how is he studying? He is doing the participant observation. He is studying the specific nature and function of religion in the Trobriand society. But his overall vision is to understand the culture as a universal institution. And he begins with this basic question, and that is again to question the dichotomies that were part of social sciences between the primitive and the West, and the assumption that the primitive are non-scientific, whereas the West, which has science and technology, are kind of more scientific. So the question that he starts in the beginning of the book is, do primitive people have any rational outlook? That is, can they think rationally, or they are kind of only believing in supernatural, or they are just kind of mastering the environment based on the supernatural? And an answer was very simple, that yes, the primitive people have a rational outlook. It's only that their way of looking at reality is different from the scientific or what's so called the Western society of reality. But it cannot be kind of considered as supernatural or cannot be kind of non-scientific. So he rejects Levi-Bruhl's idea that primitive people have a definite aversion to reasoning. And by doing his research, he will show that every activity that the Trobriand islanders do will in itself gives evidence of the fact that they had rational logical reasoning. It's not that they were kind of ignorant or kind of knowledgeless, but they were able to live their life, do the gardening, fishing, all the activity with a certain sense of the surrounding, with certain knowledge of the surrounding. And this knowledge was not necessarily kind of learned from outside, but through the everyday experience, through their everyday life, they were able to arrive at this understanding. And therefore, to give an evidence of the fact that primitive people had rational logical thinking, he gives example from the everyday life, that is the art, craft, economic activities like fishing, going and gardening, etc. So the study of religion, in his study of religion, he will be looking at these different work activities, because in the everyday activity, if they are using rational logical reasoning, it kind of goes without saying that they have some sense of knowledge, and therefore they can differentiate between magic and religion. Max Weber is kind of used in terms of understanding of logic, and Malinowski calls this the profane side of life, the side which is not religious or magical. He shows that native themselves give the area of profane apart from religion and magic. So here, unlike Durkheim, he says sacred and religion, sacred is religion. In the category of sacred, Malinowski puts both magic and religion, and profane he kind of talks about science. In his handling of science, magic and religion, Malinowski essentially accepted the traditional Western concept of dual reality. And what is the dual reality? The dual reality is the natural world versus the supernatural. The natural world is what? It's based on observation, natural procedures. So the natural is something which is kind of has an explanation. You can explain why a phenomena is happening. Whereas a supernatural is not necessarily carrying a logical explanation to it. It is most of the time abstract. It is many kind of, you cannot give a clear-cut description of why it is happening. It is either on faith or on emotional needs and so on and so forth. So why is kind of man interested in nature? This is from where Malinowski begins. And why do they kind of select number of animals as a totems? This is again that goes into the idea of understanding why a particular animal or a plant is selected as totem. Why negative injection of totemic taboos in eating behavior? Now this we'll understand more when we kind of understand Durkheim, where Durkheim is saying that the animal which is a totem, it's a kind of a taboo to eat that totem, it is forbidden. And the reason why it is forbidden is because totem is sacred. And the sacred cannot be consumed, because if you consume it, then it becomes mundane, it will lose its sacred quality. And the third question is, why subordination of taboo into clan correlated with species? So you kind of have a lot of question in terms of the ideas, belief practices which is emerging from nature. So it is from nature that the totem is selected, certain rules are constructed, and those rules kind of then helps us to understand the religious belief system. Then we also look into kind of, we are looking about taboos, we are looking about profane. Food becomes very important because the prohibition is on consumption. So you are not supposed to kind of eat certain species because you want that species to be in abundance. There is a kind of also related to economic pursuit. So the more the species, the more the economic pursuit it be. And the desire to control the species of various kind are those which are dangerous, those which are kind of useful, and then their third category is eatable. So he's also kind of giving us a functional understanding of religion, as we discussed earlier, and he's kind of making a distinction between religion and magic. So religion is something which is performed by the Trobriand Islanders, where they are kind of looking into in terms of some psychological satisfaction, some emotional balance. For instance, during a death ritual, the funeral rites performs a function of bringing the group community together. So it re-strengthens the emotional balance. So there is a crisis, the people have lost a life. So that emotional breakup is kind of balanced with a ritual. Whereas magic is something where the Trobrianders or the primitive people did not have a control. They did not know what's going to happen. For instance, when they're going on, say, sailing, and they don't know whether there'll be a cyclone or any kind of natural calamity. So that is the time that they want to perform magic. So in order to protect themselves from the unseen and unavoidable. So that, he will be looking into all the functions of religion in these life crises. The life crises are the rituals which are performed at different stages of life. So for instance, birth, puberty, marriage, death. And through this, he will help us to understand the functional importance of the religion as such. And when the focus is on death, it kind of helps us to help to overcome the contradictory tendency, that is pain, lot of emotions, and it also helps us to retain the lot of parts. So you have mummification, or you have the parts and the utensils used by the death are buried. So these are the ways in which he is going to help us to understand religion, and he will also help us to understand that primitive people, through the awareness of the everyday life, religion helps them to see reality, to live their life in a more important way. And therefore, it is kind of more, Malinowski's theory is more about emotional strength. It is something which helps us to overcome anxiety and tensions. It helps us to cope with life crises. And this is how we kind of help us to understand religion from a functionalist perspective. So for reference, we can read Malinowski's work on magic, religion and science. With this, I come to an end of today's lecture. Thank you.